On May 27, 1942, at the large anchorage of Hashirajima in Hiroshima Bay, the mighty Akagi of the Japanese Carrier Division, the proud flagship of Vice Admiral Nagumo Chuichi of the 1st Air Fleet, began moving out into the Pacific. Even though the Japanese Navy produced the mightiest battleships the world had ever seen, many of the officers believed that the real modern power on the sea lay with the carrier force, the Kido Butai. It would decide winning and losing control of the sea. And so far, the Japanese carrier fleet had proven its worth. By mid-1942, the Japanese had humiliated the Western nations at Malaya and the Indies, had moved towards Guam, Java, the Philippines, Singapore, the British bases on Ceylon, and even raided the north of Australia. They had successfully surprised the U.S. Navy at Hawaii, sinking and crippling many of the warships anchored there. And they had just scored a tactical victory at the Battle of the Coral Sea, though the Allies had prevented an invasion of Port Moresby. But that was just a hiccup, right? That battle merely confirmed that carrier-based operations would be successful against the inferior Americans. But what would be the next step? To go further into the Indian Ocean? To attempt to invade Australia? Or move again against the now-awakened giant in the east? Marshal Admiral Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, knew that the United States had to be crushed before they could bring their industrial might to bear. He ordered Eastern Operation to continue and an invasion of Hawaii. Before they could attempt that, however, the Japanese had to lure the American Navy away from the strongly defended target and towards another one that was easy enough to attack but important enough to trigger an American response. Midway, a tiny two-island atoll in the middle of the Pacific, seemed perfect for that. By June 4th, Admiral Nagumo's Kido Butai and his 4 carriers, the Akagi, the Kaga, the Hiryu, and the Soryu, was closing in on Midway. But he was without 2 carriers after the Battle of the Coral Sea. The seas had been foggy for days, and the Japanese plan was already in disarray. Their submarines were nowhere to be seen, and the main fleet was up to 2 days away. But Nagumo didn't worry, since the mighty battleships were only needed in Phase 2. After the bombardment of Midway, once the American fleet had been alerted. And after all, surprise was on their side. Yeah, except that it wasn't. American cryptographers had revealed Yamamoto's rough intentions a few days ago. The code-breaking station at Hawaii had intercepted the traffic between the Akagi and the other carriers. Realizing that something big was up, though they weren't sure of the destination, codenamed AF. So they came up with a ruse. An uncoded message about Midway's desalination system breaking down was sent and was picked up by the Japanese, who interpreted the message that they should bring a water tanker with them to AF. So, Midway it was. Let's be clear here. At this point, the Americans were indeed losing the war. The U.S. Asiatic Squadron was a shadow of its former self, and the Japanese had both the numbers and the initiative to dictate the course of the war. It would take time for the superior American industry to kick into high gear and change the balance. But what if it was too late by then? Commander-in-Chief of the American Pacific Fleet, Admiral